Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest in the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today's guest is Anurag Chandra, and he's CIO over at Kosha Capital Partners, and this interview is part of our Middle East and Africa Summit that took place in Abu Dhabi, and that was hosted by the Milken Institute. Love working with them and covering their events, and welcome to the show. Good to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It was nice to connect in the Mideast, and I'm glad we're following up and doing this now.
Yeah, so a lot to talk about. Of course, I want to get into some of your work and your background, back in what you've done in Silicon Valley, working with multiple startups, really even how you got into the business and on this line of work, and then what you're doing present day. But before we get into that, want to get a little bit further into the MEA, so Middle East and Africa Summit. So how did it treat you? Have you been to Milken conferences or events in the past? Is this the first? Give me some of the backstory.
Yeah, sure. This is my second. The Milken folks invited me to their global conference in Beverly Hills earlier in 2025. I want to say April, maybe it's May. I had a fantastic experience, and they've been very generous. They've invited me into some of their working groups, and as a part of that, let me know about the rest of their schedule. So things lined up for me with the Middle East Summit, and I thought it was fantastic. I met a lot of really interesting folks. I hadn't been in the region since 2019. COVID kind of screwed up my international travel for a couple of years, and then I was busy building the family office for my friend. And Kosha Capital is one of the entities under that family office. And so, I'd also been there in 2013, so I noticed a lot of change in the 2013 to 2019 6 years. And I figured there'd be change again, but not at the same rate. But I was really impressed. I mean, it's still growing at that same pace. And, the sophistication around a lot of the types of things that I do has increased dramatically. So there were a lot of really meaningful conversations. I feel bad. I try to ask a lot of questions because I'm greedy. I like to learn a lot from other folks. I learn from... Yeah, I'm more of an extroversion learner, so I like conversations, but hopefully I answered some questions for folks as well.
Yeah. So you've been multiple times, and I'm always just curious from the inside, on someone's process on how they digest those huge conferences, especially something like this, where when you walk into any panel, any piece of it, you're going to hear the best of the best. Me personally, I'm kind of like a kid in a candy store. I don't always go to the media stuff because that's my day to day. I want to see what else is going on in other industries or otherwise. Obviously, I have my official duties when I'm there that I have to do, but I like to explore too. What's your method? Let me into your schedule.
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is, as it pertains specifically to Milken, I was a little bit overwhelmed when I went to my first one. And I don't think Michael or Aaron will mind my saying this to your massive audience, but I went in a little trepidatious because when I asked someone who had attended, I said, what is Milken like? And they said, it's kind of like the Davos of North America. And to be honest, that turned me off because I have a certain perspective on what Davos is and has become. But it turned out to be a case of when someone tells you you're going to love a movie, you don't like it so much. When someone's like, yeah, it's okay, you go in and you end up liking it. So kind of was given this warning, at least I interpreted it as a warning. And then I went in and I was so pleasantly surprised. Yes, these are massive events and there's thousands of attendees. But first of all, from a technology perspective, I think they do a good job with their app. And, I had dozens of one-on-ones at both Milkens, and I just felt like I made some quality relationships. A really pleasant surprise. I was not expecting that. Part two is I think we're kindred spirits. So when I go to these conferences, I tend to shy away from the panels on innovation or venture capital. I'm sitting in the heart of Silicon Valley, which is still the epicenter of tech innovation. And I'm fortunate, having been here for 25 plus years, that I know a lot of the thought leaders, either technically or from a marketing perspective, or even, and I shouldn't say marketing, I mean like market strategy perspective on how a particular technology is going to evolve and find its place in the global economy. And then the hardcore scientists and researchers. So I tend to have people on my Rolodex, and I do that for a living. So when I go to those conferences, someone on a panel may say something that I have not yet heard, but the likelihood I'm going to learn a lot if I go to a private equity or private credit or infrastructure panel is a higher hit rate for me. So I tend to do that the same way you do.
Yeah. When people ask me what is it like, I say it's like my Super Bowl. I don't really watch football that much. This is my Super Bowl, especially the Beverly Hills one. I go every year. I love it. I clear my calendar. This is my Super Bowl. It's game time. I want to see what's happening in the next year. I can usually figure out trends, patterns, whatever else, just based off of really immersing in that yearly event in Beverly Hills. And now this is our first year. I think you mentioned that. Did you meet the other co-founder out in the Middle East, Chirag? I don't know. Maybe you said you met him. Okay.
No, Chirag and I met. He invited me to a dinner that you guys hosted. That was a lovely affair as well.
Yeah. So then you got to meet part of the team and the other co-founder. And so that's our yearly thing, though. So that was our first year out there. And then now we did Singapore, too. So it's good stuff. It's good to see, and it's good to connect and to be part of that overall Milken community and all the people that come together for it. It's fun. It's fun year over year, too. I think I'm maybe 5 years in now and something like that. And you go and it's like all your buddies. You're like, what's going on? Where's everybody been? What do I need to know that I don't know?
I noticed that. I had a really nice Sherpa at the Beverly Hills event, and he'd been going 5-6 years in a row, and his wife is a diplomat. And that's the other nice thing about Milken. It's a nice combination of government leaders as well as finance leaders. So he knew everybody, and you could just tell that going back to Milken is like going back to college for a reunion. And I'm looking forward to having the tenure where I experienced that. Offline, I want to get your thoughts on Singapore because I really wanted to go to that. I just couldn't squeeze it in. Oh,
man, you got to go. Got to go. It's the gateway to all of Asia. As far as I'm, like, for myself in media, like, for me, it's the gateway. Like, and I can tell you just from the media that attends, I'm in that side of things, too. So I go to, like, the media pre-events and all the other stuff like that, and then just the people that are in the know. And it's kind of like the gateway. That's the gateway. It's the way to kind of see what's going on everywhere else, and then you can decide what else you feel like exploring based off of that and going deeper. To me, that was my initial. And we did a whole series on the Singapore thing, too. So just like we're doing one for MEA, we did a whole series. I probably did 50 interviews with the stakeholders like that, too. So it was a lot of fun, too. And then it's also during F1, of course, and so conveniently. And then Token is during the same time. So you can check a bunch of boxes with one trip, actually. And it's kind of like when everybody comes out from those. So that's my 2 cents. That's online, by the way. That one doesn't have to be offline because I've been telling my audience for a long time, and those that can't, that's where I feel pretty blessed that our audience happen to be individuals like yourself. So if they can't make it, they tune in here, they hear from the players, and maybe they couldn't be there in person, but they tune in, and it was a win-win.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, well, the MEA also had Abu Dhabi Finance Week the following week and then F1 in between the last of the season. So next time I'm going to do it better. I got invited to a paddock, but I couldn't change my flight. So a little better planning next year. Hopefully I can get the most out of the 2 weeks.
Game on. Well, switching it up a bit here. So, Anurag, so you mentioned, of course, that you in Silicon Valley, you've been there for many years, and now you mentioned also building a family office. So a couple of things here. I see that, I'm guessing, you correct me if I'm off on this, but maybe some of your vantage point has changed, and now you're looking at things, and for the family office side of things, maybe looking at the global landscape overall in comparison to Silicon Valley. Like, I'm just curious about what your day-to-day looks like now, and what you're working on, what you can share.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've had a global perspective always. I mean, even as a pre-professional, my parents are Indian immigrants to the United States. I'm born and raised here, but from, I think, 6 months old, my mom was taking me back every 2 years. And back then, there were no direct flights to New Delhi, so we'd always stop through Europe, and my parents would make that a 1, 2, 3 day trip to make it a little bit more cultural. And so I've always had sort of a global vista perspective. And as far as innovation and things like artificial intelligence are concerned, I think it's just an amazing time to see how what we had mastered in Silicon Valley is starting to become a lot more common in other geographies. But specifically with the family office, like the quick backstory is I didn't expect to help set up a family office. My background real briefly is I've been an operator. I've been in 3 venture-backed technology startups, and we sold 2 to public companies. The third was a spectacular failure, but I also live in the one part of the world where that's a badge of honor and not a badge of shame. In fact, if I tell people here that same thing I told you, most people will start poking and prodding about the failure because they want to learn from it. It's just kind of the energy out here in Silicon Valley. And I've been a venture capitalist, and I've been at 4 different firms now in my career that spanned 3 market cycles. So I think I'm a more patient, thoughtful investor, having gone through the NASDAQ bubble bursting and the great financial crisis and this little mini tech wreck we had coming out of the COVID euphoria, the ZERP environment. And so managed over $2 billion in capital as an investor. And then I also, about 9 years ago, got invited to apply for an open trustee position with a pension system out here in Silicon Valley. And so 9 years running, I thought my tenure would have been over by now, but I've stayed and I've chaired the investment committee there. And between 2 pension plans, the system has close to $10 billion under management. So those 3 experiences really ended up being quite valuable when I took on this family office role. And the family office role is pretty simple. One of the founders, I actually didn't invest in him, but I was on his board in the 2000s. He bootstrapped the business, which is really cool. And it was a global business, a tech-enabled service business with thousands of employees globally. So he sold it in 2022, and I was rolling off a venture firm I'd been with. And he said, hey, come help me with the sale. And that just grew into a conversation of like, you're about to become a wealthy guy. What are you going to do with the money? And so I kind of sketched some stuff out for him, really understanding his needs, because in the family office world, there's a great saying that when you've met a family office, you've met one family office. It's quite bespoke. Everyone has their own imperatives and their own idiosyncrasies. And so we really kind of fit and tailored our family office structure to what my principal wanted. He's an inveterate entrepreneur. He doesn't play golf. He does have some hobbies, but his number one hobby is building businesses. So we created a little venture studio where he and some other folks, Seek Trust, are launching some new businesses. And because that gives us so much exposure to startup risk, we've tried to be a little bit more conservative and in a lot of liquid assets with the rest of the portfolio. So when you start a family office 0 to 1, you got to do back office, you've got to get all sorts of things up and running. So that was the lift for about 18, 24 months, and things are a little bit more on steady state. And I'm spending my time within the family office and outside, working a lot with AI startups and advising a few venture funds here in Silicon Valley.
Wow. And so as you're with this vantage point, I'm curious on like what you're looking for in the family office space, like the type of companies you're looking at. And obviously you don't have to share. I know the family office side can be pretty private, but like what interests you right now? Like what kind of deals are you looking for or at?
We are pretty opportunistic. So if someone walks in with a really interesting private credit strategy, we'll take a look. We do have, I'll just call them a team, so it's not too complicated, but just to save words, there's a team who is able to show us some really high quality stuff on the non-venture capital, non-tech startup side. And so we really kind of trust their judgment as like that first screen. It saves me from having to do 1,000 cold calls, and that's invaluable because time is limited. And so, yeah, we will look at just about anything. We do have an asset allocation model. Like that's the one thing I brought over from my time at the pension is to think in terms of asset allocation. And I fundamentally ask the same 2 questions of a person, whether they have $500,000 they're looking to invest or a big sovereign wealth fund that has, $100 billion to invest, which is need to know your time horizon and I need to know your risk profile. And if you ever fill out those forms that registered investment advisors will give you, or if you're buying a mutual fund, you got to check some boxes. That's a very crude way. Are you moderate? Are you aggressive? Are you conservative? You can actually ask more sophisticated questions and you can really kind of understand someone's risk profile. Once you understand that and you understand their time horizon, then from there, you build the allocation model. And once you've built the allocation model, from there, you can start to fill in investment strategies and managers. And for us, because a big portion of the family office corpus is direct startup risk. I mean, things can't be much higher on the risk curve than that. A lot of the other stuff tends to be more conservative. So I guess I'd answer your question, instead of giving a list of things we do, maybe what we do avoid are things where it's similar high risk, but in an asset class that we don't understand, that I don't have any pattern matching, that my principal doesn't have any pattern matching, and the team that's giving us some advice and guidance, maybe they don't know it that well either. That's what we avoid. Otherwise, we're pretty open. Like, we like yield a lot. Private credit is a little bit in vogue these days, but I've loved private credit for 20 plus years. I like private credit managers who have a niche that they understand really well, because then they can usually get better pricing and better structure and better terms. So that always works well, I think, for most family offices, because if you can get close to private equity returns without the private equity risk, who's going to complain about that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I want to switch focus just slightly here. Talking to the entrepreneurs and the investors outside of the U.S. specifically, what kind of things would you tell them?
I'm so excited because I'm going to answer your question in a personal way. I already mentioned going to India in my childhood frequently. Part of those trips were always to go see family. And I always felt guilty when I got back on the plane because I had a lot of cousins on my mom's side and my dad's side. I always felt it was unfair that I was the one who got to fly back to New York and have all this opportunity in this amazing country.
Yeah.
And it's just been really rewarding over the past 10, 15 years. I'll highlight India, but really to see the Silicon Valley playbook start to globalize, it really is something that I would like to devote the last part of my career to, is helping that globalization, because fundamentally, I believe talent is everywhere. I have to believe that because my parents have a fairly improbable story in their journey, and they were able to make it into a ecosystem that allowed them to express their talents, and then obviously give my sister and me just amazing opportunities. And I see technology and I see innovation as a path to doing that, whether it's at the bottom of the pyramid, and sometimes you can use human labor done right, not in an exploitative way, to add important leverage and scale to a business model. And it can also be technology. So the first thing I would say to folks is keep it up. Like, I see these centers developing. The Middle East, we just talked about the Middle East. It's still early innings, but there is significantly more activity. And one of the things that many of those countries in the GCC are doing particularly well is they're attracting talent. To have that immigration mindset and to make immigrants feel welcomed and a part of the fabric is important, and I see them doing that extremely well. But the specific advice that I would give to founders is you have to understand the limitations of your ecosystem. In Silicon Valley, we have a granite ecosystem, and if you think about it as concentric circles, like every ring is fully built out, and like I said, it's granite. I remember I lived in Washington, D.C. for a year in the 90s, and they were still working on the red line. And so when you'd see the subway map, you'd see like solid red. And then when you're getting out, I think it was to Silver Spring, you'd see kind of like dotted red. And most of the rest of the world has some red, but they have a lot of dotted. And I think if you have a real understanding, because when you're an entrepreneur, and certainly if you're doing a 0 to 1 startup, you're essentially, think of it as project finance. Right? It's no different than building a dam where people are going to give you money when you complete phase 1, and they'll give you the next slug of money when you complete phase 2. It's milestone driven. And to be successful at each stage, you need that environment around you that's conducive as well. So like a very simple example is you're starting a company in Mexico City. You got to really understand who your early stage investors are, because you're not going to raise money from America. I mean, the folks are going to want to be close to companies that are that immature and still at that high risk stage. And fortunately, you're starting to see these angel networks and these global networks of folks who are willing to write those early stage checks. But you have to know who your audience is. And then you have to think about your talent requirements and can you find them locally? If you can't find them locally, then you might have to find them abroad. And it's great. We all know how to use Zoom now, but there's friction involved with that. And so you have more friction points. And whereas if I were to start a company with you today here in Silicon Valley, all of those things are essentially frictionless. Not to say that it wouldn't be difficult to start a company, but talent is everywhere, capital is everywhere. And eventually, as you mature in your stages, right now I'm seeing incredible amounts of activity for some companies, global companies that are now unicorns. They can raise money from anywhere. A person from Dubai is comfortable writing a check into Mumbai, and a person from Mumbai is comfortable writing a check into Mexico City. But I just think you need to understand that. And I say that because I've talked to enough global entrepreneurs and founders where they don't. They're so focused on just the product that they want to build. And I get that. It has to be a great product that's filling a white space. and you've got to think about how you're going to get your first set of customers. But you also need to really think about what is your ecosystem going to provide you? What can my ecosystem provide to me, and what is lacking? Because I'm going to have to figure out how to supplement or substitute for what's lacking.
Anurag, man, this has been a good interview. It's good to have you on. It's great. You packed a lot into this. I appreciate that. And I'm sure my audience does as well. So first, again, thank you for coming on today, but how do people follow your work? Like, how do they connect with you? How do they follow your work?
The best place is LinkedIn. I don't post prolifically on LinkedIn, but when I do, it's there. My goal, because there were so many people kind to me in my career who took a cold call, who helped me out. I sometimes think about the people who looked out for me, grown-ups in high school and in college, and I'm like, man, why'd you do that? I'm not sure I would help me.
Yeah.
I was a little bit of a disaster and a little bit of a schmuck at times, but there were kind folks out there. So you want to be one of those types of people. I can't help them. Many of them have passed away, and many of them are just so successful. So that's the best way to reach me. Obviously, time is limited, and it's hard to be responsive to everybody. But that's really primarily where I keep my most public profile. Otherwise, I'm in the coffee shops of Palo Alto trying to talk to people smarter than me, some of the smartest people I've ever met, trying to stay current on what's going on in the technology world. I grew up in a technical family, and it's in my blood. And I do think that technology can do harm, but I mostly think it can be manipulated for good. So this is what keeps me humming in the mornings when I get up every day.
I love it. It's awesome. For everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put the link to Anurag's LinkedIn in the show notes so you can connect with him there. And speaking of the audience, if you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Yes, you heard me right. Every single day, we're bringing you new episodes, new ideas, new interviews, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way in your journey as well. So we have some great stuff planned for you. Hit that subscribe button because we don't want you to miss a thing. And Anurag, looking forward to seeing you at, I'm sure, one of these milking events coming up soon, man. So Thank you for your time.
Maybe before you let me go, I got to say kudos to you for the type of guests you have on, the wide range, the different topics you cover. I was a big fan of the Charlie Rose show, and I just feel like I get that same smorgasbord diversity listening to Media Matters. So thanks for the good work you're doing.
Awesome.